Hello and welcome to my channel Crafty Gal Confessions. Today we are personalizing a rope basket using simple embroidery stitches and a thin macrame cord. This project is perfect for customizing an Easter basket, but really it's great for customizing any basket. You could use this for baby showers or wedding gifts, even labeling baskets in your playroom or pantry. To complete this project, we are going to need a rope basket, of course, and some thin macrame cord. The thin macrame cord that you see me using in the video was purchased on Amazon and it was labeled as a 2mm. You can see obviously it works great, but it is, I think, actually closer to a 1mm macrame cord when comparing it against other cords that I own. So if you are purchasing straight off my supply list, this one does work great. But if you're grabbing one at your local craft store, I would gear towards a 1mm just to be on the safe side. We also need a large eye sharp needle. And this one's totally optional, but I am also using a fusible tearaway embroidery paper. You could definitely bypass the supply if you have great hand lettering skills and want to just freehand mark your guide directly onto the basket. But my hand lettering is terrible, y'all. So I'm tracing out a design that I quickly made in Canva. In addition, you're also going to need a marker, scissors, and an iron. Be sure to head on over to my blog at craftygalconfessions.com for a full write-up on this tutorial with all the links for the supplies that I'm using. Diving right in, I am cutting off a piece of my fusible paper and beginning to trace my pre-printed design onto the rough side of the paper. Once traced, I'm then finding the center of the front of my basket and ironing it in place. Quick note here, your fusible paper should have one rough side, that's the side that we're going to use our marker on, and a smooth side. This is where the adhesive is, so you want to be sure you're paying attention to that as you're ironing this in place. You want the adhesive to be what's coming in direct contact with your basket. Also, keep in mind that if your paper does start to lift up as you're embroidering later on down the road, you can always come back and iron it again to re-secure it. Cut off a piece of cord and thread your needle on one end, securing the other end with just one knot. One knot is sufficient here since the materials we're working with are so thick. I'm using a piece of cord about 1 yard in length. You don't want to go crazy long here because it'll result in an endless fight with knotting as you're working through your stitches. So keep a very moderate length, even if that means we have to tie off and start with a new piece several times. I promise that's easier than fighting with knotting. To start off your stitching, we're going to poke our needle through from the back side of the basket into the starting point of your text. You can see in the video here that forcing this needle through the thick rope basket is really not the easiest, and that's where your rubber thimble is going to really help you out by providing a little bit of extra grip. Once you've pulled the beginning stitch all the way through, then you're going to go back in to the same hole from the front side of the basket and pull until you have just a small loop left and stop. Do not pull it tight all the way through. We're going to need that loop for the next stitch. Then working from the back side, you'll come up where you want your next stitch to begin. I kept my stitches about 1 centimeter apart, and you do want to pay attention to the length of your stitches and try to keep them as uniform as possible as you're working through. You may notice in the video I actually marked the length of my stitches on my left thumbnail to help guide me as I went along, so there's a little hack for you if you want to try that out. Once you've found the placement for your next stitch and you've pulled that through, you'll thread the needle through the center of the loop that you left on that last stitch. Then pull that thread nice and tight so that it anchors the loop down. You'll see that I do a little bit of tugging and manipulating to that loop to get it where I need it to be. If this were embroidery on regular fabric, this would not be necessary, but because it's so tight to work with this thick material, I did a lot of tugging and manipulating as I went along. You'll see a lot of that in the footage as I work through. Then reinsert your needle back down into the same hole that you've just come through. Again, leaving yourself a small loop for your next stitch. And again, finding the starting point of your next stitch from the back side and pulling it all the way through nice and tight to secure that next loop from your previous stitch. And again, back down into the hole you've just come through. You can see this is the repeating pattern that we're going to use for the entire thing, but we will come to some stopping points and some intersections. So I'm going to skip ahead and show you how I handle the intersection on my cursive small L. Okay, so skipping ahead here, I did have one intersection in my big L and one stopping point in my small I, but I'm going to jump ahead and show you here on the lowercase l how to handle an intersection. Right here you can see that I have a small loop and I'm currently finding placement to come back up through the backside for my next stitch. I get that stitch as close to the intersection as possible and pull through as normal. Once I've threaded that through my loop and gone back down through the front to anchor it, this time I'm not going to leave a loop behind. I'm going to pull it all the way through and pull it tight to secure it. Then I'll come back up on the other side of the intersection to create myself a new starting loop and proceed. Now, the font that you choose and the letters you need are obviously likely to be different than mine. So be sure that you are evaluating the flow of your stitches and determining where your intersections are going to be and where you're going to create stopping points. I've determined on my little a that I'm going to stop the stitches right where the little L meets the little a. I'll wrap the curvature of that A and then stop at that top point and stitch the tail of the A separately. This was totally just a judgment call on how I decided the flow of it would be best. You can determine what's going to work best for your piece, but for this I'm going to show you how to create that stopping point as I come into the little A. Now you can see I've come right up as close to the placement of the A as possible. And on that last stitch, instead of leaving a loop, I'm going to just pull tight all the way through to secure. This is just like the first half of our intersection, except here we are going to weave some of our tail into the back side of the stitches that are concealed inside the basket and then snip off. Get a new piece of cord if necessary, tie a knot, thread your needle, just as we did in the very beginning. So you're going to find the starting point of your next set of stitches. For me, this is the top of the curve of the A, and then create your starting loop and proceed with your stitching as normal. Once you're ready to finish off your letters, you'll pull that last stitch tight to secure, just as you did at your last stopping point. Weave into the back side to secure and snip it off. The stitch that we just learned is a very simple embroidery stitch called a chain. Now I'm going to show you how I dot the I in case that applies to your project. First, I do a simple dot using a stitch called a French knot. Then I'm going to cut that out and show you how I made the heart shape that I kept on the project. To get your knot started, you're going to come up through the center of your dot. Pull tight all the way through and then reinsert back down in through the entry hole to create a starting loop. Then you're going to come back up through that same hole again, peeking only the tip of your needle through. Now wrap that loop spiraling around the needle 4 times. I went with 4 to create an appropriate amount of thickness to my knot for the size of my project, but if you have smaller letters than me, you could also do 2 loops around or 3 to make a less bulky knot. Then pull your thread all the way through those loops nice and tight and reinsert your needle back yet again through that existing hole. Pull nice and tight and then weave in and snip off on your backside. I just wanted to show you a simple dot, but I wanted a more girly look and created a heart for my basket. So I'm going to show you that process as well. To start the heart, I'm creating a starting loop at the bottom point of the heart, then coming back up at the highest point of the curve on one side. Thread through that loop and anchor it down, pulling nice and tight. Coming back up and creating another loop at the bottom point of the heart, and repeating that process, anchoring that loop down at the highest point of the curve on the other side. Now I've decided that I want it to look even fuller, so I come back up through that bottom point of the heart, then back down into the highest point of one side, back up through the bottom point again, and again back down into the highest point of the other side, using my fingernail to manipulate and shape it to make sure that I've gotten the shape of the heart how I want it to look. And last things last, tear off that paper and reveal that final result. Most of it should come free very easily, but you may need to use the tip of your needle to get any stubborn little bits that might be in tight spaces if you have that on your project. But here we are with our finished basket, and it is a beauty, y'all. I hope you liked this project. Be sure to head on over to my blog for the full list of supplies and a write-up on this tutorial.